Emily Carter sat quietly in the last row of courtroom 3B. The oak benches creaked beneath her as she shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact with the bailiff who had glanced her way more than once. The courtroom was full journalists, local, townspeople, a few curious students from the nearby college hall gathered for what was expected to be a straightforward trial. On the surface, it looked routine. The accused was a respected member of the community, Douglas Madsen, former foster parent, real estate developer, and longtime donor to children's charities. Charges had been brought against him, but nothing concrete. Until now, Emily's pale hands gripped the fabric of her cardigan, twisting the hem into knots. She was 19, but looked younger. Her shoulder-length hair was pulled into a loose, uneven ponytail. She had no makeup, no earrings, nothing that might draw attention. Her shoes were second-hand and slightly too big, the laces uneven. She didn't want to be noticed, but today, she couldn't avoid a dot at the front of the room. The prosecutor stood behind the table, reviewing notes with an assistant. The defense team looked relaxed, confident. Douglas Madsen sat upright, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his hands folded neatly on the table. His silver hair was combed back, and he wore the faintest trace of a smile, as if he already knew how this would end. He had money, reputation, and a powerful legal team. Emily had only her memory, and that was shaky at best. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Marianne Keller entered swiftly, robes flowing, her face expressionless. She was known for being strict, punctual, and unsentimental. She took her seat and nodded to the clerk. The day's proceedings began. For over an hour, the courtroom listened to opening statements. The prosecution outlined a disturbing but vague narrative of abuse and coercion in the Madsen household, spanning years. They alluded to witnesses who had withdrawn, evidence that had been tampered with, and systems that had failed repeatedly. Then they mentioned Emily. She is the only one who did not run, the prosecutor said, his voice calm. She is the only one willing to speak the truth in this courtroom. When Emily's name was called, her heart nearly stopped. She stood slowly, her legs weak and her steps uncertain. The entire courtroom turned to look. She walked past the rows of strangers and reporters, past the man she hadn't seen in 2 years, and stepped into the witness stand. Her hands trembled as she raised her right hand to take the oath. Her voice cracked as she promised to tell the truth. When asked to state her name, she barely whispered, "Emily Carter." The judge leaned in, her brow furrowing. "Miss Carter, please speak louder." Emily nodded, but her throat tightened. The first question came. "How do you know Mr. Madsen?" "I was in his care," she answered, barely audible again. "Miss Carter," the judge said firmly, "we need you to speak up so the court can hear you." Somewhere in the room, someone stifled a laugh. The defense attorney leaned toward his client and whispered something, prompting Madsen to smirk. Emily's fingers clutched the edge of the witness box. She looked out at the sea of unfamiliar faces, all staring, waiting. Her eyes flicked to Madsen. He looked at her like he always had, not angry, not even afraid. Just calm, as if he still held control over her. The prosecutor asked her again, "Can you please tell the court what happened to you while living with Mr. Madsen?" Emily hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her chest tightened with anxiety. No one had believed her the first time, not the caseworker, not the school nurse, not the officer who said she had no proof. They all said Madsen was a good man, a savior, a mentor. Speaking now felt like standing in front of a firing squad. Then, slowly, she leaned forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. But her whisper was clear, steady, and sharp as glass. "He kept me in the basement for 6 years." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One juror dropped her pen. A reporter fumbled with his notepad. The prosecutor blinked in disbelief. Even the judge sat back slightly, stunned. Emily didn't stop. He said the world had forgotten me. That? No one wanted me. He said I was safer there. He gave me rules. I wasn't allowed to talk to the others. I wasn't allowed to eat unless I earned it. I had a chain on my ankle. The basement was cold. There was a mattress and a bucket. That was all. Objection. The defense attorney shouted, leaping to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. This is hearsay and emotionally manipulative. Overruled, the judge said quickly. Let her speak. Emily's eyes never left Madsen now. Her fear was still there, but it had become something more, a kind of resolve. The kind of strength that comes not from being brave, but from having no more to lose. The judge leaned in again, but this time her voice softened. Continue, Miss Carter. So she did. With nothing but a whisper, Emily Carter had shattered the silence of an entire courtroom. No one in the room moved for a full 5 seconds after Emily spoke. Even the judge seemed momentarily stunned. The gavel sat untouched. Reporters paused mid-sentence, pens hovering above notepads. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on the girl. In the witness stand, who had just whispered words that felt like a scream, the defense attorney recovered first. Your Honor, the witness is clearly traumatized. We need to question the reliability of such a statement. She hasn't produced any physical evidence. These are highly emotional accusations without factual grounding. The judge's sharp gaze turned on him. Mr. Delaney, the court will allow her to continue. You'll have time for cross-examination. Sit down. Delaney clenched his jaw, but obeyed. Emily swallowed hard. Her hands gripped the wooden ledge in front of her. She seemed more frightened now that she'd spoken, but she didn't back away. The prosecutor stepped closer. Emily, I know this is difficult, he said gently. But can you explain what you meant when you said he kept you in the basement? Emily's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. He told me I wasn't ready to be around people, that I would ruin things. So I stayed down there. He came down once a day, sometimes not at all. Sometimes ... he brought food, other times just water. What did the basement look like? There was no carpet. No lights except a bulb he controlled from upstairs. A mattress with springs sticking out. A metal bucket. A small window I couldn't reach. Did he ever hurt you? Yes, she blinked. He said it was discipline. Gasps again. Madsen shifted in his chair for the first time. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. The prosecutor continued. Did anyone else live in the house during that time? Other foster kids came and went. They stayed upstairs. I wasn't allowed to talk to them. Did anyone ever see you in the basement? Emily hesitated. I don't know. I think one girl, Lena, might have heard me crying. She left a month later. He said she didn't listen. The judge leaned forward. Emily, how long were you kept like this? She looked down. Her whisper came again. 6 years. From age 12 until 2 months before I turned 19. The courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor paused to let the weight of her words settle in. Did you ever try to escape? Emily nodded. Twice. The first time I got caught before I could even reach the stairs. He didn't feed me for 5 days. The second time, I got out. That was the moment everything changed. A few people in the gallery started crying. A woman clutched her chest. One juror stared at the floor, blinking rapidly. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was reverent. Can you tell us how you escaped? I found a crack in the window. I broke the glass with a metal pipe he left once. I waited until he left the house. I climbed through. My arms were bleeding. I ran down the road barefoot until someone stopped their car. And what did you do after that? I told the police. but they didn't believe me. Said there wasn't enough evidence. They brought me to a group home. The prosecutor nodded. Why did you come forward again now? Emily looked across the room. Her eyes found Madsen's. Because I heard he took in a new girl. 14. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Madsen broke his silence then. She's lying. He yelled, standing abruptly. That girl is disturbed. She was always troubled, always causing problems. The judge banged her gavel hard. Mr. Madsen, you are out of order. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. Madsen sat again, his face red, sweat collecting on his brow. Emily didn't flinch this time. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to request a search warrant for the defendant's home. The witness claims a journal exists, hidden beneath a floorboard in the basement. If we find it, it would corroborate her account. The judge nodded slowly. Granted. The defense objected, of course, but the judge shut him down. This court will pursue any material evidence that may confirm or deny the witness's account. Within the hour, a team of officers and forensic investigators was dispatched to the Madsen home. A hush spread through the courtroom. Recess was declared. People filed out in silence, speaking only in whispers. Emily sat alone in the hallway. Outside, her legs dangled off the wooden bench. Her hands were still shaking, but her expression had changed. She looked lighter. The prosecutor sat beside her. You did well. I didn't say everything. You said enough for now. She nodded. Will they find it? I believe they will. Across town, in a sprawling suburban house with trimmed hedges and manicured grass, officers tore up floorboards. In the far corner of the basement, beneath a loose plank beneath the mattress, they found it, a worn notebook, pages yellowed and water-stained. Inside were entries dated from 2017 to 2023. Handwritten notes, crude drawings, lists of punishments, marks made to count the days. Some pages were torn, others stuck together. But it was real. That evening, the lead investigator called the courthouse. We found the journal, he said. She was telling the truth. Back in the judge's chambers, the news arrived like a thunderclap. Judge Keller stared at the photographs. In disbelief. A silence lingered in the room. Heavy and humbling. Emily was still waiting in the hallway when the prosecutor returned. They found it, he said. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked up. I told you, she whispered. I don't lie. And for the second time that day, a whisper changed everything. The courtroom reassembled the next morning with a tension that seemed to throb in the air. News had spread quickly overnight. A journal had been found. Not a rumor, not a theory. A real handwritten notebook hidden beneath the floorboards of Douglas Madsen's basement. Every bench was filled. Reporters lined the walls, some sitting on the floor just to be in the room. The atmosphere was different now, heavier, more serious. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about truth. About all the things no one wanted to believe. Emily sat at the witness stand again, this time with her shoulders slightly straighter. Her fingers still fidgeted in her lap, but her eyes stayed forward. The prosecutor held the journal in a sealed evidence bag. It was frayed, stained, and creased from years of being hidden in darkness. We've confirmed its authenticity. He began. The handwriting matches samples from Emily's old school assignments. The dates range across 6 years. Inside are hundreds of entries, some brief, others detailed. There are drawings of the basement layout, records of meals, descriptions of punishments, even mentions of other children who briefly stayed upstairs. The judge took the bagged notebook from the bailiff and examined it quietly. She didn't speak for several moments. I have never seen anything like this in my courtroom, she finally said. Madsen sat across the room, his face tight, lips pressed together. He avoided looking at the journal. his attorneys whispered. Urgently, their confidence now visibly rattled. The prosecutor continued, reading directly from a few pages. A-193. He didn't bring food. I drank from the faucet and got sick. A-232. Heard another kid crying upstairs. I whispered. Through the vent. I think they heard me. A-417. My ankle hurts. The chain is too tight. If I die here, will anyone know I existed? The last line made the room go silent again. Emily sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. Everyone listened. No one dared speak. Then the prosecutor asked, Emily, do you remember writing these? She nodded slowly. Yes, I wrote to survive. How did you hide it? He didn't check under the mattress often. There was a floorboard that was already loose. I slid the journal under it whenever I wasn't writing. Why did you write everything down? In case someone ever found me. I wanted them to know what happened. I didn't want to just disappear. The defense attorney, clearly agitated, stood quickly. Your Honor, this is being presented to play on the jury's emotions. My client denies these allegations in full. There is no physical evidence linking him directly to the journal beyond her word. Judge Keller raised an eyebrow. The journal was recovered from your client's home, Mr. Delaney. The witness's writing has been authenticated. You'll get your chance for cross-examination. Emily's voice, still soft, cut through the tension. He never thought I'd live long enough to tell anyone. Heads turned toward her. The room was silent again. The prosecutor approached one last time. Emily, was there ever a time you thought you might not make it out? She looked straight at him. Every day. Across the courtroom, a woman began to cry softly. The sound was barely audible, but it cracked through the wall of silence like a dropped glass. A juror wiped his eyes. Madsen leaned back in his chair, visibly agitated for the first time since the trial began. The court recessed for lunch, but no one really left the story behind. In the halls, people whispered Emily's name. Some watched her with sympathy, others with awe. She wasn't the ghostly figure they'd seen on day one. She was something else now, something resilient. She had faced her worst fear and spoke its name aloud. And it had changed everything. Outside the courthouse, news trucks had gathered like vultures. Anchors gave live updates while holding up photos of the notebook, blurred for TV. Emily's name began trending nationwide. Commentators debated the failures of the foster care system. Officials were suddenly answering questions they had ignored for years. Inside, the judge called court back to session. We will allow the jury to view selected pages from the journal. We will also hear testimony from forensic experts who verified the paper's age and contents. The defense objected. Overruled. The experts testified. The ink used matched pens manufactured between 2016 and 2021. Dust samples taken from the basement matched residues found on the journal. There was no evidence that it had been planted recently. Madsen's face had changed by now. The arrogance had drained out of him. He looked older, smaller. His once smug expressions were replaced with quiet discomfort. He no longer whispered to his attorney. He stared at the table. UNMOVING. Emily returned to the stand once more before the day ended. Do you remember the last thing you wrote in that journal? The prosecutor asked. Emily paused, then nodded. Day 2109. I saw stars tonight. I don't think I've ever seen them before. I want to believe there's more. Why did you write that? Because it was the first night. I believed I might live. The court adjourned for the day. Outside, Emily stood in the fading afternoon light. Reporters tried to approach her, but she ignored them. The prosecutor walked with her down the stairs. You've changed everything, he said quietly. I didn't want to, she replied. I just wanted it to stop. And now? Now I want him to know he doesn't control the silence anymore. She walked to a waiting car and disappeared behind tinted windows. Inside the courtroom, her whisper still echoed. And the world was no longer silent. The next morning, a quiet town woke up to a national storm. Emily Carter's story was everywhere. News channels ran exclusive segments about the basement girl, showing blurred photos of the recovered journal. Hashtags exploded across social media. Talk shows, blogs, even parenting forums debated the case, demanding answers. People who had once called Douglas Madsen a hero now questioned everything they thought they knew. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. Some carried signs that read, "Believe survivors," or "Justice for Emily." A few still supported Madsen, holding up posters that said, "Innocent until proven guilty." But most stood silent, shaken. Inside the courtroom, the weight of public scrutiny pressed on every wall. Judge Keller opened the day with a warning. "Let the record reflect," she said, "that this court will not be influenced by public opinion, only by facts presented before it." Still, the atmosphere had changed. The jury looked more attentive. Even the defense attorneys had stopped. Whispering, the prosecutor called his next witness, Lena Janssen, a name no one expected. Emily's eyes widened when she saw the tall, soft-spoken woman enter the courtroom. Lena had lived in the Madsen home 6 years ago, a short-term foster placement. No one had heard from her since. But now, she walked with purpose and sat firmly in the witness chair. "Miss Janssen," the prosecutor asked, "do you remember living with Douglas Madsen?" "I do," she replied. "For 4 months when I was 15. Do you remember anything unusual?" "Yes. I heard noises coming from the basement. Crying, scratching. I asked about it, but Mr. Madsen told me it was the plumbing." "Did you believe him?" Lena looked straight ahead. "No. I tried opening the basement door once. It was locked from the outside. After that, he sent me to another home." Emily's hand instinctively covered her mouth. She had always wondered if anyone ever heard her. Now she knew someone had. "Why didn't you speak up before?" the prosecutor asked gently. "I was scared," Lena replied. "He told me I'd be labeled a liar. And after I left his house, I was placed with 3 more families in 2 years. No one wanted to listen to a foster kid with no proof." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "When I saw Emily's story on the news, I knew I had to come forward." The defense attempted to undermine Lena, pointing out inconsistencies in her memory. Her old behavior reports from school, even a shoplifting charge when she was 16. But the jury didn't seem moved. The girl sitting on the stand today wasn't. Broken she was brave. By afternoon, 2 more former foster kids had been located. Their names were redacted in court to protect their identities, but both submitted written statements. One note read, "He never let us in the basement. He told us a raccoon had gotten stuck down there once and died. The smell was awful. He kept that door locked every day." The second statement described odd behavior. Mr. Madsen coming upstairs late at night, washing his hands repeatedly, then locking the basement door behind him. Bit by bit, the image of Douglas Madsen community, leader, donor, trusted guardian crumbled. His attorney grew more aggressive. During cross-examination, he tried once again to paint Emily as unstable, suggesting her trauma had led her to hallucinate, exaggerate, or even fabricate her story. Emily's response was firm. "Do you think a child draws chains and buckets for fun?" The defense attorney backed off. When court recessed that day, the media frenzy reached a new high. Protesters had gathered around City Hall, demanding answers from the Department of Children and Family Services. How could this have happened? How many caseworkers had visited the Madsen home? Why did no one look in the basement? That night, under pressure, The director of the local foster agency resigned. The mayor gave a public statement. We failed her. And if Emily hadn't spoken, we might have continued failing others. Emily watched it all, from the group home where she now stayed, under protective supervision. For the first time in years, she had a bed near a window. She looked out at the streetlights, at the trees, at the world she had forgotten existed. Her story had cracked open a truth no one wanted to admit. But even in that moment, she felt unsure. It didn't bring her comfort yet. Not exactly. Because despite all the attention, the headlines, and the outrage, he still hadn't been convicted. The trial wasn't over. She knew what people wanted. A neat ending. A verdict. A headline that said, "Justice served." But justice, Emily had learned, didn't come wrapped in bows. It came slowly, painfully, one truth at a time. The next morning, she would take the stand again. The prosecutor had warned her cross-examination would be brutal. The defense would try everything to tear her down. They'd bring up her school records, her mutism, her therapy sessions. They'd call her damaged. They'd try to make the jury believe her pain made her unreliable. Emily stared at her reflection in the group home's bathroom mirror that night. "You're not the basement," she whispered to herself. "You're not the silence." And when she stepped into the courtroom the next day, she did not sit like a victim. She sat like a survivor. The community may have crumbled, but Emily was finally beginning to rise. The courtroom was packed again. People who'd never attended a trial in their lives filled every seat, some standing in the aisles just to witness what many were calling the most important testimony yet. This was the day of cross-examination, and everyone knew it would be brutal. Emily Carter sat in the witness stand for the third time, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lawyer had warned her. The defense would do everything in their power to discredit her. And this time, they had come prepared with a stack of documents, old records, even fragments of her past she had tried hard to forget. Douglas Madsen looked composed again. For the first time in days, he had regained that polished air of control. His lawyers were sharp, their voices smooth and deliberate. Defense attorney Delaney stepped forward, all smiles. "Miss Carter," he began, "thank you for your testimony. I understand this is difficult for you." Emily didn't answer. She had learned silence made them uneasy. Delaney continued, "Let's talk about your school record. We found multiple notes about behavioral issues, truancy, fights, a diagnosis of selective mutism. Would you say you've always struggled with stability?" "I wasn't unstable," she answered evenly. "I was surviving." Delaney raised a brow. "You once accused a previous foster parent of hitting you. That report was never substantiated. Isn't it possible you misinterpret things?" The question hung in the air like poison. Emily paused, then looked him straight in the eye. "They didn't believe me then either, but I didn't lie." He moved to another file. "And this journal," he said, holding up a photocopy of the pages. "Let's be honest, Miss Carter Howe. Do we know you didn't write this after you left, to build a case? You're smart enough to fabricate this, aren't you?" A few people in the gallery gasped. The judge gave a warning glance, but Delaney pressed on. "You had access to notebooks in the group home. You could have written this at any time. There's no video footage of you chained. No medical records from those exact dates. No direct witnesses saw you in that basement. What you're offering, while powerful, is still just your word." Emily's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "I didn't make it up. If I were trying to lie, I would have made the story easier to hear." Delaney smirked. "But it's quite the story, isn't it? Sounds like something out of a horror film." "That's because it was," she said. Silence. Delaney walked toward the jury box, clearly trying to sway them with logic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we must be cautious. This young woman suffered trauma. Yes, But trauma can distort memory. We don't punish people based on pain alone. We punish based on facts. But the jury didn't look convinced. Emily didn't need to cry. She didn't need to scream. She simply sat with the dignity of someone who had spent years with nothing, and still found the courage to speak. The prosecutor stood for redirect. "Emily," he said gently, "how did it feel to hear your story questioned like this?" "I expected it," she said. "People ignored me for years. Why stop now? And what do you want out of this trial?" Emily's eyes found the jury. "I want him to stop hurting people. I want kids like me to know someone will listen. Even if it takes years." Delaney stood for one final attempt. "Miss Carter, do you hate Mr. Madsen?" Emily blinked. "I don't know. I used to, but hate is heavy. I'm tired." The judge ended the session for the day. As people filed out of the courtroom, something had shifted. Delaney had tried to poke holes, but the jury saw something deeper. Emily never changed her story. She never cracked. And even when the worst parts of her past were dragged into the light, she stayed standing. Outside, the news cameras focused on the defense table. Madsen's lead attorney refused to answer questions. Rumors began to spread that members of Madsen's legal team were fighting internally. Pressure mounted. Public opinion was clear, and it wasn't in their favor. Inside the courthouse, Emily sat alone on a bench outside the restroom, waiting for the crowd to thin. A janitor passed by, nodding gently at her. No one else spoke to her, but they stared longer than usual, not out of judgment this time, but something closer to respect. Prosecutor sat beside her quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than before. You did great." Emily looked down. "They think trauma makes you unreliable, but it's the only reason I remember every detail. I had nothing else to hold on to." He didn't reply right away. Then he said, "We have one more surprise for them." Emily turned. "What is it?" "A neighbor, someone who never came forward. She says she heard screams one night. She never forgot them." Emily exhaled. For once, it didn't tremble. "Good," she whispered. "Let them hear someone else's voice for a change." That night, Madsen's team filed a motion to dismiss the case, citing insufficient physical evidence. The judge denied it within hours. And the next morning, the courtroom was different. Because now, the defense wasn't just cracking, it was breaking. The courtroom felt colder that morning, as if everyone anticipated something that would shake the walls. Emily Carter arrived early, hair pulled back neatly, wearing a simple gray sweater. She didn't look like the frightened girl who once whispered her truth. She looked composed, haunted, perhaps, but unshakable. Douglas Madsen was visibly tired. His once confident posture slumped. His lawyers whispered with urgency. The failed motion to dismiss had clearly rattled them. Judge Keller entered and called the court to order. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the state would like to call an unexpected witness, Mrs. Meredith Clove, a neighbor who lived across the street from Mr. Madsen for nearly a decade." Gasps fluttered through the room. Emily's eyes widened. She didn't recognize the name. Mrs. Clove stepped forward slowly, hands clasped together. She looked to be in her early 60s, dressed plainly, glasses sliding down her nose. The prosecutor asked gently, "Mrs. Clove, how long did you live near the Madsen home?" 9 years, she replied softly. "I moved there after my husband passed." "And did you ever hear or witness anything unusual at that residence?" Her face tightened. "Yes. One night, maybe 4 years ago, I heard something, a scream. It was sharp, short, but it stopped me in my tracks." The courtroom froze. "Can you describe it?" the prosecutor asked. "It sounded like a child. A girl. I was taking out the trash when I heard it. I walked toward the property, but the lights were off. Everything was quiet again. I assumed maybe. I had imagined it. Did you report it? She hesitated. No. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't want to cause trouble. But I never forgot that scream. The defense objected hearsay, unreliable memory, speculative evidence. But Judge Keller overruled. She's offering testimony based on direct experience, the judge ruled. The jury may weigh its relevance, the prosecutor continued. Why did you come forward now? Mrs. Clove turned to Emily. Because I saw her face on the news, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. Emily blinked rapidly, but didn't cry. Courtroom was still. Next, the prosecution played a recording. This audio, he said, was recovered from an old baby monitor a previous foster child brought home. They had kept it all these years. The background noise is faint, but we've enhanced it. As the recording played, a low hum filled the room. Then, the unmistakable sound of chains clinking. A panicked breath. And a girl's voice barely. A whisper, please ... Let me out ... please ... I'll be quiet. Please ... I'm sorry ... Several jurors covered their mouths. One man removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Emily bowed her head. That voice had once belonged to her. But she hadn't heard it in years. Now the world was hearing it for the first time. The defense was visibly shaken. They objected again, claiming the voice was unverifiable. But their protests fell flat. The jury had heard too much. And more was coming. That afternoon, the prosecution called Detective Marissa Hall, one of the first investigators who'd entered the Madsen home after Emily escaped. She described the scene. In vivid detail, the locks, the stained mattress, the hollow echo of the basement. Photos were shown on the courtroom projector, grainy, dim, but unmistakably real. A bucket in the corner. Scratches on the door. Rope fibers still embedded in a wooden beam. These were not storage signs, the detective said firmly. These were signs of captivity. The jury looked horrified. Madsen kept his eyes on the floor. And then came the moment Emily didn't expect. The prosecutor returned to her one last time. Emily, he asked, is there anything else you want to say? To this court? She hesitated, and nodded. Standing up, she turned slightly in her chair, facing not just the judge, but the room itself. I was alone in that basement for most of my childhood, she said. I stopped believing people would come. I stopped believing I mattered. But I kept whispering anyway, just in case someone was listening. Even if it was just me. She looked at the jury. This everything you've heard. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about what people choose to ignore. The neighbors who heard nothing. The teachers who asked no questions. The system that put me there and never checked. Again, I was invisible. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. But I'm not invisible anymore. No one spoke. Even the judge looked momentarily moved. Emily sat back down slowly. The courtroom was dead silent. Outside, the news anchors broadcasted her speech within minutes. Hashtags surged again. Activists called for reform in foster care oversight. Former foster children shared their own stories online. Emily had become something more than a survivor. She had become a voice for thousands who never got the chance to speak. And inside the courtroom, the defense was collapsing. The prosecutor rested his case. All that was left now was the verdict. The final day of the trial arrived. Reporters packed the courthouse steps before sunrise. The public had waited weeks for this moment, and the courtroom buzzed with tense anticipation. Emily Carter sat quietly in her chair, her hands no longer trembling. Her attorney, Mr. Lawson, gave her a nod, no words, just reassurance. Across the room, Douglas Madsen sat hollow-eyed, staring forward, motionless. His fall from grace had been swift, but the jury's decision would seal his fate. Judge Keller took his seat and addressed the courtroom. Today, we will hear final arguments. The jury will then begin deliberation. The prosecutor stood first. He paced slowly before the jury, pausing between each sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you have seen the photos. You have heard the screams. You have read the journal that documented years of torment. You've met the girl who suffered in silence because no one listened." He turned to Emily. "And you saw what courage looks like." He returned to the jury. "This isn't just about one man's cruelty. It's about a system that allowed him to hide behind status and money. But now, the truth has come to light. Your decision will not only bring justice to Emily, it will send a message to every child still waiting to be believed." He paused. Douglas Madsen used fear as a weapon. He thought her silence protected him. But it didn't. Her whisper carried further than his threats ever could. "Don't let her down. Don't let others like her down." He returned to his seat. Then came the defense. Attorney Delaney stood, eyes narrowed, his tone now more desperate, then confident. "Members of the jury," he said, "what happened to Miss Carter is tragic. No one denies she faced hardship. But we must judge the accused on facts, not emotion." He gestured toward Madsen. "There's no definitive video. No DNA from the basement linking Mr. Madsen directly to the acts described. The photos show a disturbing place, but not the act of captivity itself. The screens on tape are haunting, yes, but whose voice is it, really?" Some jurors shifted, unconvinced. Delaney pressed on. "This case is built on a single testimony. A powerful story, yes, but stories can be rehearsed. Memories can change. Pain can cloud perception." Emily looked straight ahead, unmoved. "And if you convict a man based on pain alone," Delaney finished, "you set a precedent that emotion can overrule evidence." He sat down. Judge Keller addressed the jury. "You have heard both sides. You will now begin deliberations. The court is adjourned until a verdict is reached." The jury left the room. Emily sat still for a moment, her fingers folded over her knees. Her lawyer leaned in. "No matter what they decide, you already won. You made the truth known." But Emily didn't reply. She had waited years for someone to believe her. One more hour wouldn't matter, but it would still feel like forever. Hours passed. By evening, the courtroom lights dimmed slightly. People whispered, refreshed news pages, stared at the closed doors behind which 12 strangers decided her future and his. Finally, the bailiff entered. "The jury has reached a verdict." Gasps echoed as people scrambled to their seats. Emily stood, her legs wobbly. Her lawyer gently placed a hand on her back. The judge returned. "Will the defendant please rise?" Madsen stood. The courtroom was a vacuum. Every breath seemed suspended. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with steady eyes, held the paper in her hand. "In the matter of the People versus Douglas Madsen," she began, "on the charge of unlawful imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty." Emily's heart skipped. "On the charge of endangering the welfare of a minor, guilty. On the charge of aggravated abuse of a dependent minor, guilty." One by one, the charges were read, and with each guilty, the weight on Emily's chest lifted a little more. Madsen didn't flinch. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at Emily. When the final charge was read, the judge turned to him. "Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. The defendant is remanded to custody without bail." The courtroom exploded into whispers, gasps, and murmurs. Emily's lawyer leaned in. "He's going to prison for a long time." She nodded. Still no tears. Just quiet, numb relief. Reporters ran out of the courtroom. News alerts lit up phones. Across the nation, social media erupted. #Her whisper was now trending worldwide. Outside, people chanted Emily's name. Supporters held signs. "We hear you. Justice for the forgotten. Believe survivors." But inside, Emily sat still for a moment longer. Then she rose, walked past the defense table where Madsen stood cuffed, and paused. She didn't look at him. She had nothing more to say to him. She had already said enough. As she stepped outside. Into the daylight, the cameras flashed. A wave of noise rose around her. But for once, the noise wasn't overwhelming. It was supportive, powerful, real. And for the first time in her life, Emily Carter felt free. 2 weeks after the verdict, Emily Carter returned to the same courtroom, not as a victim, not even as a witness, but as a symbol. The public now called her the whisper that roared. Her story had gone far beyond headlines. It sparked rallies, legislative hearings, and national conversations. But for Emily, the final chapter wasn't fame, it was closure. The courtroom felt different this time. Not tense, not cold. There was warmth, subtle but real. Faces turned to her with recognition, not pity. Respect had replaced silence. Douglas Madsen was escorted in, now pale and unshaven, wrists chained. No cameras were allowed during sentencing, but reporters filled every seat. Judge Keller entered. "This court is now in session for the sentencing of Douglas Madsen. Will the defendant please rise?" Madsen stood. "Mr. Madsen," the judge began, "you have been found guilty on multiple charges, including unlawful imprisonment and aggravated abuse. The evidence presented revealed not only disturbing physical conditions but long-term psychological trauma caused to a minor under your care." He glanced toward Emily, then continued, "The court recognizes the courage it took for Miss Carter to come forward. She not only survived, she revealed a system of neglect, one that we, as a society, are responsible for fixing." He turned back to Madsen. "For your crimes, I sentence you to 45 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 30 years. Gasps rang out. Madsen's face remained blank. "You may be seated," the judge said. The room remained frozen. And then he turned to Emily. Double quotes, "Miss Carter, would you like to address the court?" Emily nodded and rose slowly. She walked forward, not timidly, not defiantly, but calmly. Every eye watched her. "I never thought I'd be here," she said. "Not as a survivor. Not standing." She paused. "For years, I thought my voice didn't matter. I whispered in the dark, not because I expected anyone to hear me, but because I didn't want to forget I existed." She turned slightly, facing Madsen, and back to the courtroom. "You thought you erased me," she said, her voice unwavering. "But you didn't. You tried to break me, but I bent, and then I healed." She looked at the judge. "I hope what happened to me never happens to another child. But if it does, I hope they know their voice can be powerful, too, even if it starts as a whisper." Silence. The judge gave a solemn nod. "Thank you, Miss Carter." The proceedings ended. The gavel struck. And just like that, justice was official. Outside, crowds erupted into applause as Emily exited the courthouse. Journalists surged forward, but she gave no interview. Not yet. Her story had already been told. Now she was ready to live it. Over. The next few weeks, Emily was invited to speak at universities, on television, and at foster care reform summits. She partnered with organizations to help overhaul caseworker policies and improve oversight of foster homes. She even launched her own nonprofit, Whisper House, a refuge for children who'd been through trauma like hers. It provided shelter, therapy, legal aid, and most of all a platform for their voices. Her first book, Whispers in the Basement, became a bestseller. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about resilience. About how surviving wasn't enough, healing was. The true revolution. She testified before Congress. She shook hands with governors. But she never forgot who she was, a girl who once sat alone in a dark room, whispering to no one, praying someone would listen. Years later, a young girl named Chiara stood at the podium during a Whisper House fundraiser. She was 14, rescued from an abusive home through Emily's hotline. She looked shy at first. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "I used to think no one heard me. Then I heard about Emily Carter, and I knew I wasn't alone." Emily smiled from the front row, tears in her eyes. That night, as she sat by her window, she opened the journal she'd once hidden under a floorboard in the basement. The same one she used to scribble messages in for no one to read. She flipped to the first page. "I don't know if I'll ever get out, but if I do, I promise I'll help someone else find their voice." She closed the book and whispered into the night air, "Promise kept." And the world once deaf kept listening.